Sophie was never the most beautiful woman in her village. Her simple looks were enough for her quiet, content life, far from the eyes of admirers. She was an ordinary woman, with ordinary days spent helping her family and living in peace. But things changed when rumors spread of wolves lurking in the forests surrounding their village. At first, people dismissed them as mere tales, something parents told their children to keep them close to home. But one night, the wolves came. It was a blood-curdling night, the kind where the wind howled and the villagers, too, screamed in terror. The wolves were no ordinary beasts. They were ferocious, with gleaming eyes that cut through the darkness. They hunted anything that moved, ravaging livestock, homes, and people. Sophie, caught in the chaos, tried to flee, but it was too late. Out of the shadows, one of the wolves lunged and bit deep into her shoulder. Her vision blurred with pain, and everything went black. When Sophie awoke, she found herself bandaged, but something inside her had changed. She felt stronger, her senses sharper, and every full moon brought a storm inside her, a growing hunger, a pull she couldn't resist. It wasn't long before she realized the truth. She had become one of them, a werewolf. Her once calm, gentle mind was overwhelmed by the new power coursing through her. The village had been her home, but now she was part of something wild. The transformation consumed her, and she found herself drawn to the forest, where other werewolves awaited. The pack, sensing her arrival, initially resisted her presence, but as time passed, Sophie's intelligence and cunning set her apart. She rose quickly through the ranks, and soon she became their alpha. The former leader, a brooding and bitter werewolf named Kieran, was filled with envy. He had ruled the pack with brute force, but Sophie's wit made her their new queen, and he hated her for it. Kieran waited for the right moment, and his opportunity came soon enough. One fateful night, he revealed her secret to the villagers. The woman they once knew had become a beast. Panic spread and the people turned against her. She was banished, forced to leave her home and even her pack. Kieran, feeding off his jealousy, also exiled her from the wolves, leaving Sophie utterly alone. She wandered the forests, haunted by what she had lost. The nights were cold, but colder still was the absence of belonging, of the life she had once known. Even though the wild now pulsed through her veins, Sophie missed her humanity. She ached for the days when she was simply herself, not the alpha of a pack, not a monster feared by all. And then she met Ben. He appeared one evening as if from the mist, tall, handsome, with an aura that drew her in. There was something dark about him, but Sophie found comfort in his company. He wasn't afraid of her, and they spent countless hours talking about the mysteries of their lives. She shared her story, and he listened with empathy, or so it seemed. Sophie fell in love with him, convinced that perhaps she had found something, someone who could give her the love she so desperately sought. But love, she soon realized, was a game to Ben. One night, Sophie discovered the bitter truth. Ben wasn't there for her. He was a vampire, and he had been using her to gather information about the wolves, her pack. His parents had been killed by werewolves, and he had harbored a burning desire for revenge ever since. His charm, his affection, all of it had been a lie. When Sophie confronted him, begging him to stop his plan, Ben was already gone. Desperate, Sophie returned to the pack, pleading with them to prepare for an attack. But the werewolves, still angry over her exile, refused to listen. To them, she was a stranger now. She was no longer their alpha. The next day, Ben returned, but this time he didn't come alone. He brought with him an army of vampires, determined to wipe out the pack that had destroyed his family. The battle that followed was swift and violent. Sophie, though cast aside by her own, couldn't stand by and watch. She still had memories of the good times she shared with the pack, the loyalty they had once shown her. With fierce determination, she threw herself into the fight, standing between the vampires and her former family. Her strength, her cunning, had always set her apart. And now, in the heat of battle, she fought not just as a werewolf, but as someone who still cared. The pack saw her bravery and slowly began to fight alongside her. Yet, the vampires were strong, and the battle grew more brutal by the minute. Sophie knew Ben well. She knew his weaknesses, the small details he had let slip during their time together. Using that knowledge, she attacked where he was most vulnerable, exploiting the cracks in his defenses. The tide began to turn, and soon the vampires were in retreat. But Sophie couldn't bring herself to harm Ben. Despite everything, she still loved him. She asked him to surrender, to end the fight peacefully. Ben, seeing the defeat of his comrades, agreed. The pack, recognizing Sophie's role in their survival, welcomed her back as one of their own. For a moment it seemed like there could be peace. Then, in an instant, Ben lunged at Sophie, trying to end her once and for all. But before his strike could land, the alpha werewolf, Kieran, rushed in and finished Ben off. Sophie screamed in anguish. The man she had loved, despite his betrayal, lay lifeless before her. She knew, deep down, that Kieran had saved her. Had he not intervened, Ben would have killed her. Still, the loss hit her hard. Kieran, seeing her grief, apologized, his voice rough and broken. For the first time, there was no envy in his eyes, only regret for what he had done to her before. Sophie stood over Ben's body, feeling the weight of all that had transpired. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. She had found love, lost it, and now stood at a crossroads between her humanity and the wildness that had taken over her life. The pain of losing Ben burned deep inside her, but she knew she had to move forward. The pack had given her another chance, and though her heart ached, she couldn't dwell on the past. She had made her choice. Sophie was not just a werewolf. She was a leader, and she would guide her pack through whatever came next. But the memory of Ben would always linger, like a shadow on her heart, a reminder of the love that had once been and the sacrifice she had made to protect those who had abandoned her. And so Sophie walked forward, a lone wolf with a heavy heart, but a fierce resolve to never let herself be broken again. In the aftermath of the battle, the pack came to rely on Sophie once again. Though she was no longer their alpha, they respected her strength, her wisdom, and her bravery. Kieran, the werewolf who had saved her life by ending Ben, was known by his true name, Hawk. He had once been Sophie's bitter rival, but something in him had shifted after that night. Perhaps it was seeing Sophie's sacrifice, or perhaps it was the way she had risen above the pain and betrayal. Hawk began spending more time with her. At first, it was out of necessity. The pack needed to rebuild, and as one of the most capable leaders, Sophie was crucial in guiding them. But soon, his visits became more personal. They would patrol the forest together, talking about the past, the future, and the uncertainty of their lives as werewolves. Though Sophie kept a polite distance, Hawk found himself drawn to her. He admired her strength, not just in battle, but in how she carried the weight of her choices. The way she had loved Ben, even after he had betrayed her, had touched something deep inside him. Slowly, without realizing it, Hawk began to fall for her. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Hawk would catch himself watching her, his feelings growing stronger. They had shared so much: fights, victories, losses. And there were the moments of quiet, when they would sit together under the moonlight, speaking softly, the weight of the world left behind for a while. But as much as Hawk's affection for Sophie deepened, he knew that she didn't feel the same. Sophie was kind to him, even affectionate at times, but her heart remained distant. She had loved once, and the wound Ben left had not yet healed. Sophie was focused on something more than pack life or romance. She was searching for a way out, a way to regain her humanity, the life she had been forced to abandon. Hawk saw this in her eyes, in the way she gazed out at the village beyond the trees, longing for a simpler existence. He never spoke of his feelings, never tried to pressure her. He loved her too much to stand in her way, and he knew that whatever path Sophie chose, it would not include him. Sophie, in her quest for freedom, began experimenting with controlling her transformation. She studied the cycles of the moon, meditated, and focused her mind. With time and patience, she found that she could resist the pull of the full moon. Each time the change came upon her, she would push it back, mastering her body and its urges. It was difficult, a battle between the beast within and the woman she wanted to be. But Sophie had always been strong, and soon the transformations stopped altogether. The pack watched in awe, unable to believe what she had achieved. For the first time in years, Sophie stood as she once had, fully human. Her body no longer betrayed her, no longer turned into the creature that had once controlled her life. Hawk admired her more than ever, but he knew this was where their paths would finally diverge. Sophie had become something more, something none of them could follow. She was leaving the world of wolves behind, and Hawk, despite his love for her, knew that she deserved happiness, even if it wasn't with him. Years passed, and Sophie settled into a new life. She moved to a nearby town, far enough from the village and the pack to begin fresh. It wasn't long before she met someone. James, a kind, gentle man who had no idea of the battles Sophie had fought. He saw her only as a woman, not as a former alpha or a werewolf, and that was exactly what Sophie needed. She and James fell in love, slowly, naturally, without the weight of the past dragging them down. They married in a quiet ceremony, just the two of them and a few close friends. Sophie's life became peaceful, and for the first time, she felt truly free. The full moons came and went without incident, her control over her body complete. She no longer worried about the beast inside her. She was human, fully and completely, and she had chosen that path. Hawk, back in the forest, heard about Sophie's new life. He never visited, never intruded. He remained with the pack, leading them with the same strength and wisdom Sophie had once shown. But a part of him would always carry the memory of her, the woman who had been a wolf, the woman who had chosen her humanity over the wild. Though he had lost her, he never regretted the love he had felt. He knew it had made him better, stronger. Sophie's days with James were filled with joy, but sometimes, when the moon was high in the sky, she would look out into the distance and remember the forest. She would remember the pack, the battles, and the love she had once felt for both Ben and Hawk. They were memories now, from a life that seemed far away. But Sophie was happy. She had fought for her freedom, and she had won. Now, at last, she could live the life she had always wanted, a life of peace, a life of love, a life of her own choosing. Mitchell had just moved into her new house, a charming cottage nestled in the heart of the American countryside. The fresh air and quietness were exactly what she needed after years of city life. Little did she know, just beyond the trees, her neighbor harbored a dark secret. Henry had lived on his secluded property for years, isolated by choice. He was no ordinary man. The curse of the wolf coursed through his veins, and he had learned to live with the danger it brought. But everything changed the day he saw Mitchell for the first time. The first encounter was innocent. Mitchell was struggling to move a heavy box from her car, and Henry, who had been walking by, couldn't help but offer his assistance. He approached her, his tall frame casting a shadow over the box. "Need a hand with that?" His voice was smooth, almost too calm for the intensity flickering behind his dark eyes. Mitchell smiled, unaware of the lurking danger, and thanked him. "I just moved in. I could use the help, thanks." From that moment, their interactions became more frequent. Days turned into weeks, and soon they were spending every evening together. They would sit on her porch, the stars above them twinkling, and talk about everything: her old life in the city, his love for the wilds, and the peace they both found here. Henry was careful, never allowing his emotions to reveal his true nature. He cherished the time they spent together, though his instincts whispered warnings to keep his distance. He could feel himself getting attached, and that terrified him more than the beast within. One evening, the two were walking along a path behind Mitchell's house. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting the woods in a soft twilight. Henry walked beside her, his eyes tracing the lines of her face as she laughed at something he had said. Her joy was infectious, and he found himself laughing too, a rare occurrence for him. They stopped by a small clearing, the trees opening up to reveal the stars above. It was a perfect moment, and Henry knew it was dangerous to let it continue. But as Mitchell turned to face him, her eyes soft with affection, he couldn't stop himself. He leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was tender, but electric. Mitchell felt a warmth spread through her, deepening her affection for him. She hadn't known Henry long, but it felt like they had always been connected. His touch was both comforting and exhilarating. She had never felt like this before, so completely taken by someone. Henry pulled away, his breath steady, though the weight of his secret bore down on him. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he said, his voice low, as if confessing something sacred. Mitchell smiled. "I'm glad you did." Their bond grew stronger after that night, inseparable. Days were filled with stolen moments of affection, their laughter echoing through the countryside. But Henry was haunted by his secret. He couldn't keep hiding the truth from her forever. The full moon was approaching, and with it came the inevitable. One night, as they lay in her living room, the fire crackling softly beside them, Mitchell spoke. "You seem distracted," she said, her voice filled with concern. Henry looked at her, his jaw tightening. He wanted to tell her. She deserved the truth. But how could he explain that he wasn't entirely human? "There's something I need to tell you, Mitchell," he began, his voice hesitant. Her face softened with concern, and she moved closer to him, gently placing her hand on his. "What is it?" "I'm not like other people," he said, carefully choosing his words. "There's a part of me that I've kept hidden from you." Mitchell furrowed her brows, sensing the gravity of his words. "What do you mean?" Just as Henry opened his mouth to speak, a distant howl echoed through the woods. It was close, too close. His body tensed. The moon was rising, and the transformation was beginning. He stood abruptly, backing away from her. "I need you to stay inside, no matter what you hear tonight," he ordered, his voice suddenly urgent. "What are you talking about?" Mitchell stood, confused and alarmed. Henry's eyes were wild now, the change already coursing through him. He backed toward the door, barely able to hold himself together. "I'll explain everything. Just please, stay inside." Without waiting for her reply, he fled into the night. Mitchell watched him disappear into the darkness, her mind spinning. She didn't understand what was happening, but she trusted him. Something was terribly wrong. Outside, the moon shone bright, and Henry could no longer hold back. His body twisted and contorted, bones shifting painfully as he fell to the ground, the beast taking over. The curse had won, as it always did. Inside, Mitchell watched from the window, her breath catching as she saw the massive form moving through the trees. It wasn't Henry anymore. It was a creature, large, terrifying, and wild. And yet, something about the way it moved, the way it looked back at her with those familiar eyes, told her the truth. Henry was the creature. The realization hit her, but fear didn't follow. Instead, her love for him surged stronger than ever. She knew, deep down, that he was still Henry. Whatever he was, it didn't matter. Their bond was too strong to be broken by a curse. The night passed, and as the dawn broke, Henry returned. His body, human once more, was bruised and battered, but he found Mitchell waiting for him, unafraid. "You're not running?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. Mitchell stepped forward, gently placing her hand on his face. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, her eyes full of love. "We'll face this together." "You don't understand, Mitchell," Henry began, his voice low but firm. "I'm not safe for you. When the full moon rises, I can't control what happens. I could hurt you. I could destroy everything we have." He took a step closer, his gaze intense. "You need to leave me for your own good." Mitchell didn't flinch. "I know who you are, Henry, and I know what you are, but I'm not afraid." She reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. "You've always protected me, even from yourself. You won't hurt me." Henry pulled back, shaking his head. "You don't get it. The wolf, when it takes over, it's not me. It's something wild, something dangerous. I can't risk you being near me when that happens. You deserve someone who can give you a normal life, not this." "I don't want normal," Mitchell said softly. "I want you. All of you. Human and wolf. We're meant to be together, and nothing is going to change that." Her eyes locked onto his, steady and unwavering. "You've tried to push me away before, but it's not going to work. I'm staying, no matter what." Henry's jaw tightened, torn between the fear of what he might become and the love he couldn't deny. He searched her face for any sign of hesitation, but all he found was a quiet strength. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Mitchell smiled. "More than anything." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the night around them alive with the sounds of the forest. Then, Henry exhaled, the weight of his fears lifting just a little. "All right," he said, finally giving in. "But you have to promise me. You'll stay away during the full moon. No matter what happens, you stay safe." Mitchell leaned in, pressing her forehead gently against his. "I promise." From that moment, they were inseparable, bound not just by love, but by a shared understanding. Henry knew the danger would always be there, lurking beneath the surface, but with Mitchell by his side, he believed they could face it together, and together, they did. Henry was walking down the quiet streets one night when he sensed it, something different, something off. Out of the shadows, a group of werewolves emerged, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They were tall, imposing, and silent for a moment before one of them stepped forward. "You need to stay away from humans, Henry," the leader growled. His voice was rough, dripping with warning. "You know what happens to humans who get too close to us. They're in danger." Henry's jaw tightened. He knew what they were hinting at. "Mitchell." "She's not in danger with me. I can control it." The leader scoffed, crossing his arms. "You can't. None of us can. Not completely. And if she stays with you, something bad will happen. It always does." Henry's eyes flickered with doubt, but something else, something darker, caught his attention in the group. One of them, a younger werewolf standing to the side, avoided his gaze. There was something strange about the way he stood, almost like guilt, but Henry couldn't put his finger on it. "Is that a threat?" Henry asked, his voice low. The leader shook his head. "It's a warning." They left as silently as they had come, disappearing into the night, leaving Henry with their words weighing heavily on him. He knew they were wrong, but still, he told Mitchell everything when he returned. Mitchell listened, her face calm. "You can control it, Henry," she said, reaching for his hand. "I believe in you. You just need to try, even during the full moon. You can stay human. We can live a normal life together." Henry wanted to believe it too. So, with Mitchell's encouragement, he began trying. The first few nights of the full moon were brutal. He fought against the pull, the transformation clawing at him, begging to be unleashed. He failed more than once, losing control and feeling the beast tear through him. But Mitchell was always there, patient, telling him not to give up. And slowly, through sheer will, he began to master it. Each night, the wolf fought him less. He felt more in control, more himself. Days passed, then weeks, and soon Henry found that he could remain fully human even under the full moon's influence. He was free, and the future with Mitchell seemed brighter than ever. They dreamed of a life together, away from danger, just the two of them. But that dream shattered the day Henry came home to find the door ajar. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep inside. He rushed in, calling out for Mitchell, but the house was eerily silent. And then he saw her. Mitchell lay on the floor, her body still and broken, blood staining the ground beneath her. There were deep gashes across her skin, the unmistakable marks of a werewolf attack. Henry's legs felt weak as he fell beside her, disbelief washing over him. He gently touched her as if hoping she would wake up, but her lifeless form only confirmed his worst nightmare. "Mitchell," he whispered, his voice trembling. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She was gone. The one person who had believed in him, the one person who made him feel human, was taken from him in the cruelest way. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. This wasn't just an accident. He knew it. The werewolves who had warned him, they had done this. And then he remembered the younger wolf, the one who had stood in the background, avoiding his eyes, the one who had liked Mitchell. It all made sense now. Jealousy. That's what had driven him. That wolf had attacked Mitchell because he couldn't stand to see her with Henry. Anger surged through Henry, a rage he hadn't felt in a long time. But this time, it wasn't the wolf inside him. It was pure, human pain. He didn't care about control anymore. He didn't care about staying human. All he wanted now was revenge. But as he stood over Mitchell's body, tears burning in his eyes, he realized something else. Mitchell had asked him to stay human, to live a normal life. That's what she had believed in. And for her, he would have to hold on to that, even though his heart felt shattered beyond repair. The wolf inside him wanted to break free, but Henry stood there, breathing slowly, trying to find strength in the promise he had made to her. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. But even as the sorrow consumed him, one thing was clear. Mitchell would never want him to lose himself to the beast again, so for her, he would stay human, even if it meant living with the pain. Henry knelt beside Mitchell's lifeless body, the world around him fading into a blur. His mind raced, disbelief turning into a cold, bitter anger. The love he had fought so hard for, the humanity he had tried to hold on to, it all seemed meaningless now. Everything he had given up, everything he had restrained himself from, was shattered in an instant. A deep, primal rage began to rise within him. He had tried to live a life of peace for Mitchell's sake, to keep the werewolf inside at bay. But now, the pain and betrayal were too much. His body trembled, and without the full moon, he began to change. His muscles tensed, his skin rippled, and his form twisted into that of the werewolf he had fought so hard to control. In moments, Henry was no longer the man Mitchell had loved, but the beast he had always feared becoming. His senses sharpened, and the scent of those responsible filled the air. They were near. He knew it. Driven by fury, he raced through the night, his eyes glowing with determination as he tracked the pack that had done this. They had warned him before, told him to stay away from humans, but now they had taken the one person he cared about, and they were going to pay. When he reached the clearing, the 5 wolves stood there, waiting for him. They were calm, their glowing eyes fixed on him as if they had expected this moment. They didn't speak, didn't flee. They were prepared. Henry growled, his rage pushing him to attack, but before he could strike, they moved. In a blur of motion, the pack charged at him, their strength and numbers overwhelming. One slammed into him, knocking him off balance, while another struck from behind. He clawed at them, his fury giving him strength, but there were too many. They were coordinated, working together like a well-trained pack while Henry fought alone. He managed to wound one, but the others closed in, their attacks relentless. Teeth sank into his side, claws raked across his back. The pain was intense, but it only fueled his anger. He fought back with everything he had, but he was outnumbered, and the attacks kept coming. Just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The wolves backed off, their eyes still fixed on him before they turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving Henry battered and bleeding. He collapsed to the ground, his body aching, his mind clouded with exhaustion. He had failed to protect Mitchell, failed to get justice, and now he was alone with nothing left but his anger and the memory of the life with disappointment. For days, Henry lay in the shadows, his body healing but his mind growing darker. The pain of losing Mitchell still lingered, but it was no longer the deep sorrow that once broke him. Now, it was a hunger for power, for vengeance, for control over the very world that had taken everything from him. He began to hunt. No longer the restrained, controlled man Mitchell had loved, Henry became a predator, preying on the innocent. He found strength in their fear, power in their helplessness. Each time he struck, he felt himself growing faster, stronger. The humanity that had once tethered him to Mitchell's memory faded with every life he took. Soon, Henry was ready. The pack that had destroyed his life, he was going to destroy them. And this time, they wouldn't stand a chance. When he found them again, lurking in the same forest where they had last faced him, he was no longer the werewolf struggling for control. He was something more, a force of nature, an unstoppable beast driven by rage and newfound power. He didn't wait for them to attack. Henry moved first, faster than they could react, tearing into them with a speed they hadn't expected. His claws ripped through fur and flesh, his fangs sank deep, and within moments the once feared pack was overwhelmed. One by one they fell, unable to match his strength or speed. The werewolves who had once been his tormentors were now nothing but bodies lying broken in the dirt. Henry stood over them, victorious, but there was no satisfaction, no relief, only the gnawing emptiness inside him, growing larger with every act of violence. But even that wasn't enough. The power Henry craved pushed him further, and he continued to hunt, to take lives. Innocent people, those who had nothing to do with his pain, became his victims. His strength grew, but so did the darkness that consumed him. Then, one night, as he prowled the streets looking for his next victim, something familiar caught his eye. A woman, older, tired-looking, but with the same eyes as Mitchell. Her mother. Henry froze. She didn't see him, didn't know the monster lurking in the shadows. But Henry couldn't move. He had lost Mitchell, but this woman, this was a piece of her, a part of the love he had cherished. He had become a monster, and now he was about to take away the one person left who reminded him of what he had once been. In that moment, something snapped inside him. The power, the rage, the hunger. It all felt wrong. Henry turned and fled, his mind racing with shame and horror at what he had become. He ran, not knowing where he was going, but feeling the weight of every life he had taken bearing down on him. Soon, he found himself at the base of a towering mountain, its peak hidden in the clouds. Without thinking, Henry began to climb, higher and higher, until the world below was just a blur of distant memories. At the top, he stood alone, the wind howling around him. His mind was clearer now, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he thought of Mitchell. Her smile, her warmth, the love they had shared before everything had fallen apart. He knew what he had to do. With one final look at the world he had left behind, Henry stepped off the edge. As he fell, There was no fear, no pain, only the hope that in death he might find peace. Maybe, just maybe, he would see Mitchell again, whether in heaven or hell.